Lowe's is facing another lawsuit, and this one isn't about a pricing error or a one-off mistake. It's about discounts that allegedly were never real in the first place, sale prices that stayed the same for months, and urgency tactics designed to push you to buy fast before you stop and question the deal. The lawsuit claims this wasn't an accident, but a consistent pattern used both in stores and online. If you've ever walked into Lowe's thinking you were getting a deal, this case suggests you may have been pushed into buying under false pretenses. Today, we're breaking down everything, how these pricing tactics work, why they keep happening, and by the end of this video, you'll know how to spot fake discounts before you buy anything, so you don't fall for it again. Lowe's is being sued for fake sales. Here's what that actually means. When people hear that a major retailer is facing another lawsuit, most tune out. It sounds technical, repetitive, or disconnected from everyday shopping. But this case matters precisely because it focuses on something almost everyone experiences: believing they're getting a deal. This lawsuit wasn't filed by a competitor or a watchdog group. It was filed by a regular consumer who says Lowe's pricing tactics convinced him to buy products he otherwise wouldn't have purchased. The allegation isn't that Lowe's charged illegal prices. It's that the company allegedly presented prices in a misleading way, making shoppers think they were saving money when they weren't. At the center of the case is how Lowe's advertised discounts. According to the lawsuit, certain products were labeled as on sale using higher reference prices, the familiar "was" price, even though those higher prices were rarely, if ever, what customers were actually paying. The so-called sale price, the lawsuit claims, was often the normal price all along. That distinction matters more than it sounds. A sale isn't just a lower number. It's a promise. When a retailer shows a crossed-out price, it signals urgency and opportunity. It tells shoppers, act now or you'll miss out. If that urgency is manufactured, the entire decision-making process gets distorted. The plaintiff says that's exactly what happened. He purchased blinds and a refrigerator believing they were discounted, only to later notice that the same prices kept appearing again and again. The sale didn't end. The deal didn't disappear. The price simply stayed the same while continuing to be framed as a markdown. According to the lawsuit, this wasn't limited to one aisle or one moment in time. The pricing approach allegedly appeared both online and in physical stores, across categories like blinds, shades, and major appliances. Items people buy infrequently and don't usually price track. That's what makes the tactic effective. Shoppers don't have a reference point, so they trust the tag. From a legal standpoint, pricing laws don't just focus on what you paid at checkout. They focus on how the price was presented to you before you bought. If a retailer advertises a former price, that price is supposed to be genuine, recent, and meaningful, not a number used briefly, or one that exists mainly to make the current price look better. Lowe's denies these allegations, but the case was still serious enough to be moved into federal court, and it follows similar lawsuits already filed against the company. Whether the claims ultimately succeed or not, the pattern being alleged raises a bigger question for shoppers. Because once you understand how this kind of pricing works, you start noticing something else. You start seeing products that are always on sale, discounts that never seem to expire, price tags that promise urgency but never actually change. And that's where the real problem begins, because a sale that never ends isn't a sale at all. In the next section, we're breaking down how these permanent on-sale prices work, why they're so common, and why they're one of the biggest red flags shoppers overlook every day. The on-sale prices that never actually go away. Most shoppers don't immediately notice when something feels off. They just feel it. You walk into Lowe's, see a bright sale tag, maybe even a special buy label, and it feels like you arrived at the right moment. You think, good timing. That feeling is exactly what a sale is supposed to create. But according to the lawsuit, that feeling may have been carefully engineered. One of the main accusations is that certain products were advertised as on sale for extended periods of time, without the price ever meaningfully changing. The sale didn't end. The discount didn't expire. The product simply stayed at the same price while continuing to be framed as a temporary deal. That's not how sales are supposed to work. A real sale is temporary by design. It's meant to clear inventory, respond to competition, or move seasonal stock. When a sale stretches on indefinitely, it stops being a sale and starts being a presentation tactic. The problem isn't just the price, it's the message attached to it. When something is labeled as discounted, shoppers assume there's a deadline. They assume waiting will cost them money. That assumption changes behavior. People buy faster. They compare less. They second-guess themselves less. The lawsuit argues that this urgency wasn't tied to reality. It claims shoppers were responding to a signal: this deal won't last, even though the price was likely to be the same weeks or months later. This is especially effective with products people don't buy often. Appliances, blinds, and large home items already come with pressure. You're usually buying them because something broke, you're moving, or you're on a deadline. Add a sale tag to that situation, and hesitation disappears. Over time, shoppers start to internalize this pattern. They see the same items on sale again and again, but instead of questioning it, they accept it as normal. The discount loses its meaning, but the psychological trigger remains. The red tag still works, even if nothing is actually changing. That's why this kind of pricing is so powerful. It doesn't rely on deception you notice immediately. It relies on repetition. It trains customers to associate certain prices with savings, even when those prices are just the baseline. And once you strip away the sale label, something uncomfortable becomes obvious. If this is the price the product always sells for, then the real manipulation isn't happening at the checkout. It's happening in comparison between the price you're paying and the higher number you're being shown, because that higher number is what convinces you you're winning. And that brings us to the most important part of the illusion, the so-called original price itself, where it comes from, who actually paid it, and why it exists at all. The original prices shoppers were never actually paying. Once you stop trusting the sale label, your attention naturally shifts to the other number on the tag, the one doing most of the convincing, the crossed-out price, the was price, the number that exists to make the current price feel like a win. According to the lawsuit, this is where the alleged deception becomes more serious. The claim is that many of the higher original prices shown to shoppers weren't prices customers were actually paying in any meaningful way. They may have existed briefly, or rarely, or not at all in normal shopping conditions. Yet, they were presented as if they were the standard price everyone used to pay. That matters because comparison pricing only works if the comparison is real. When a retailer shows you a higher reference price, it's supposed to reflect a genuine former price, something a significant number of customers actually paid recently. Otherwise, the savings being advertised don't represent reality. They represent a story. This is why the was price is so powerful. It doesn't just show you a number, it frames the decision. It tells you what the product is worth, and it positions the current price as a favor being done for you. Shoppers don't usually question that number. They assume it came from past sales, market conditions, or manufacturer pricing. They don't imagine it as a marketing tool, and that assumption is exactly what the lawsuit challenges. The accusation is not that Lowe's invented random numbers, but that it used reference prices in ways that exaggerated savings, creating a bigger gap between was and now than shoppers would reasonably expect. That gap is what creates excitement. It's what makes people feel smart for buying now instead of later. The problem is that once you realize few people ever paid the higher price, the comparison collapses. The savings vanish. You weren't getting a deal, you were being anchored to an inflated starting point. This anchoring effect is subtle but powerful. When you see a product marked down from a higher price, your brain treats the discount as value, even if the final price isn't particularly good. You stop asking, is this a fair price? And start thinking, how much am I saving? The lawsuit suggests that many shoppers made decisions based on that framing, believing they were beating the system, when in reality, they were just accepting the system as presented. And this doesn't happen randomly. These tactics tend to show up most where shoppers are least equipped to challenge them. Products with wide price ranges, infrequent purchases, and few obvious benchmarks. If you don't buy something often, you don't know what it normally costs. So the reference price becomes your guide. Once you understand that, another pattern starts to make sense. These pricing strategies don't show up evenly across the store. They cluster in specific categories, items that are expensive enough to make discounts feel meaningful. but unfamiliar enough that shoppers can't easily verify them. That's not an accident, it's a strategy. And once you see where that strategy shows up most often, you start to understand why certain aisles are always covered in red tags, and why others aren't. Why Lowe's uses appliances and blinds for these pricing games. At this point, a pattern starts to become clear. These pricing tactics aren't scattered randomly throughout the store. They show up again and again in the same types of products, and that's not by accident. According to the lawsuit, many of the disputed discounts involved blinds, shades, and major appliances. These aren't small, everyday purchases. They're items most people buy rarely, sometimes only once every several years. That matters because unfamiliarity is where pricing tricks work best. When you don't buy something often, you don't have a mental benchmark. You don't know what a good price looks like. You're forced to rely on the information in front of you. The sale tag, the crossed out price, the percentage off. And if that information is misleading, your entire decision gets shaped around it. Appliances are especially effective for this. Prices vary widely based on brand, features, and timing. One refrigerator might be $200, another $2,400, and both look similar at a glance. That wide range makes almost any discount feel believable. If you see a big markdown, it feels significant, even if the final price is average. Blinds and shades work the same way. Most people don't buy them often enough to know what they should cost. Measurements, materials, and brand names make direct comparisons difficult. By the time you're ready to buy, you're already committed. A sale tag at that moment feels like relief. The lawsuit suggests that this is exactly why these categories are targeted. They combine three things that pricing tactics thrive on: higher prices, low purchase frequency, and limited price memory. Shoppers are vulnerable not because they're careless, but because they're human. Once you recognize this, you start noticing how heavily these aisles are decorated with discount language, red tags, big percentages, special buy labels. Everything reinforces the idea that you're catching something at the right moment, even if that moment has been going on for months. And this is where a lot of viewers realize something uncomfortable. If you've ever felt pressured, rushed, or oddly relieved to see a sale tag on a big purchase, you weren't imagining it. That pressure is part of the design. If this breakdown is already changing how you look at sales, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It helps the channel, but more importantly, it tells the algorithm to surface this kind of consumer protection content to more people who could use it. Because once you start questioning where these discounts appear, another question naturally follows. If the pricing is already carefully curated by category, how else is it being shaped? And that's when shoppers notice something even more unsettling. The same product can appear to be a better deal depending on where you're looking at it. Sometimes it's not the price that changes, it's the context, and that's where the illusion gets even stronger. Online versus in-store. Two prices, one illusion of a deal. At this point, it becomes clear that pricing isn't just about what number you pay, it's about where and how that number is presented to you. And one of the most effective ways to shape perception is by splitting that experience between online and in-store. Most shoppers assume that checking prices online makes them smarter and more protected. You look something up before heading to the store, or you pull out your phone in the aisle and it feels like you're doing your due diligence. But the lawsuit highlights something uncomfortable. Online pricing doesn't always clarify things. It often reinforces the same illusion. On Lowe's website, pricing is wrapped in layers of framing. You'll see crossed out ways, prices, bold discounts, percentage savings, and labels like special buy or limited time offer. None of those elements change the price itself. What they change is how your brain interprets it. Before you even think about whether the number is good, you've already been told that it's better than it used to be. In-store, the effect is just as strong, but it works differently. Physical signage is bigger, louder, and harder to ignore. Sale tags stand out from the shelf. End caps spotlight discounted items. Employees may reinforce the urgency without meaning to, simply by pointing out that something is on sale right now. What makes this especially effective is how the two environments support each other. You might first see a product online, notice that it's discounted, and file that away mentally. Later, when you see it in-store at the same price, the sale feels confirmed, or you see it in-store first, feel the pressure of the aisle, and then check online, only to see the same. Discount language mirrored back at you. That repetition builds confidence. It feels like verification. The deal appears to exist everywhere, so it must be real. But repetition isn't proof, it's reinforcement. The lawsuit suggests that this consistency across platforms can make misleading pricing harder to detect. When the same framing follows you from screen to shelf, there's no moment of contrast. Nothing breaks the spell. You never see the price without the narrative attached to it. This matters most on expensive purchases. When you're spending hundreds or thousands of dollars, reassurance becomes more important than savings. You don't just want a low price, you want to feel justified. Seeing the same deal online and in-store gives you permission to stop questioning. But here's the key issue. If the price is the same everywhere, all the time, and the sale language never disappears, then the environment, not the discount, is what's driving the decision. At that point, the framing becomes more important than the math. Shoppers aren't asking, is this the best price? They're asking, is this the right moment? And that's a much easier question to manipulate. Once you see how online and in-store pricing work together, another layer becomes impossible to ignore. It's not just the sale labels or the crossed-out prices. It's the pressure built around them. The sense that waiting is risky, that hesitation costs money, that acting now is the smart move. And that pressure doesn't come from the price itself. It comes from urgency language that never seems to run out. That's when the countdown clocks, ending soon banners, and constant reminders start to feel less like helpful information and more like a strategy designed to keep you from slowing down long enough to notice what isn't changing at all. The fake urgency. Limited time, sales that never end. Once shoppers accept that a price looks the same everywhere, the pressure has to come from somewhere else. And that's where urgency steps in. Urgency language is one of the most powerful tools in retail because it doesn't argue with you, it rushes you. Words like limited time, ending soon, and last chance don't ask you to evaluate the price. They ask you to act before thinking too much. According to the lawsuit, this sense of urgency was often disconnected from reality. Discounts were presented as temporary, even when the pricing stayed the same over long periods. Countdown-style language appeared, disappeared, and then reappeared. Not because the sale ended, but because the messaging reset. This works because most shoppers don't test urgency claims. They don't come back weeks later to see if the deal really disappeared. They assume it did. The urgency doesn't need to be true. It just needs to feel true in the moment. Psychologically, urgency shuts down comparison shopping. When people believe time is limited, they stop searching for alternatives. They stop waiting for better deals. They stop asking whether the price is normal. The focus shifts from value to timing. The lawsuit suggests that this pressure was especially effective when combined with already confusing pricing. When a shopper sees a sale price, a higher crossed-out number, and a message implying the deal could vanish, the decision starts to feel obvious, even if it shouldn't be. Over time, this kind of urgency becomes background noise. Shoppers get used to seeing it everywhere, so they don't consciously question it. But the emotional response still works. The tension is still there. The impulse to act still triggers. That's why urgency doesn't need to be aggressive to be effective. It just needs to be constant. A steady reminder that waiting might cost you, even when waiting wouldn't change anything at all. Once you recognize this pattern, something else becomes clear. These tactics aren't mistakes. They aren't accidents. They keep showing up because they work, and because the consequences, when they exist at all, tend to arrive long after the purchases are made, which raises a bigger question. If lawsuits like this keep happening, and retailers keep using the same playbook, what incentive is there to stop? Because the answer to that explains why shoppers keep seeing the same pricing behavior year after year across different products and promotions. And understanding that incentive is what finally turns suspicion into clarity. Why these lawsuits keep happening. At some point, a reasonable shopper asks the obvious question. If these pricing tactics keep triggering lawsuits, why do they keep showing up? The answer isn't mysterious, it's structural. For large retailers, pricing behavior is evaluated at scale. A tactic doesn't have to be perfect or universally liked. It just has to work often enough to justify its use. If a pricing strategy increases conversions, shortens decision time, or reduces comparison shopping, it does its job long before anyone challenges it. Lawsuits, when they happen, arrive much later. They take years. They affect a fraction of total sales. And even when retailers pay settlements, those costs are often small compared to the revenue generated while the pricing tactic was active. From a business perspective, that imbalance matters. The upside happens immediately. The downside, if it comes at all, is delayed, diluted, and spread out. That's why these cases often focus on patterns rather than single incidents. One misleading price doesn't matter much. A system that consistently frames prices in a certain way does. And when that system quietly nudges thousands or millions of shoppers toward faster decisions, the impact adds up long before anyone notices. This also explains why the same allegations keep resurfacing across different retailers and different product categories. The playbook is familiar because it's effective. Reference pricing, perpetual sales, urgency language, none of these are new. They're refined. What tends to get lost in the conversation is that most shoppers aren't being tricked in a dramatic way. There's no moment where everything feels obviously wrong. The experience feels normal, familiar, comfortable, and that's what makes it powerful. By the time a shopper realizes they didn't actually save as much as they thought, the purchase is long over. The return window has closed. The urgency has faded, and the emotional energy needed to challenge the experience is gone. That's why the burden quietly shifts onto consumers. The system doesn't require everyone to fall for it, just enough people, often enough, to make it worthwhile. Once you understand that, the situation stops feeling personal and starts feeling predictable. These tactics aren't aimed at careless shoppers. They're aimed at normal behavior, trust, urgency, and the assumption that a sale label means something. And that realization is important because it reframes the problem. The goal isn't to avoid lows entirely or to assume every sale is fake. The goal is to recognize when pricing is being used to rush you, anchor you, or frame a decision in a way that benefits the seller more than you. Because once you know what to look for, the advantage shifts back. And that's where this story stops being about lawsuits and starts being about control. What you can check, what you can ignore, and how to decide whether a discount is real before you ever reach the register. How to spot fake discounts before you buy anything. By this point, the pattern should feel familiar. Fake discounts don't usually look fake. They look normal. They blend in. And that's why the only real defense is knowing what to check before the pressure kicks in. The first thing to look at isn't the sale price. It's the history of the sale. If something is marked down today, ask yourself a simple question. Have I seen this deal before? If the answer is yes, especially across multiple weeks or visits, that's your first red flag. Real sales come and go. Permanent ones don't. Next, ignore the percentage and look at the final number. A big 30% off label feels impressive, but percentages don't matter if the starting point was inflated. Instead of asking how much you're saving, ask whether the final price makes sense compared to similar products. If the price still feels average, the discount probably is too. Then look closely at the was price. Don't assume it represents what people were actually paying. Ask whether it feels realistic. If a product is always shown as marked down from the same higher number, that reference price is doing marketing work, not historical work. Urgency language deserves even more skepticism. Phrases like limited time, ending soon, or last chance should trigger a pause, not action. If there's no clear end date, no inventory explanation, and no visible change when time passes, the urgency is likely artificial. Real deadlines don't reset quietly. Context matters. 2. If the same product appears discounted online, in-store, and across multiple locations, that consistency doesn't prove the deal is real. It often proves the framing is standardized. Repetition creates confidence, but confidence isn't the same as value. Product category is another clue. Big ticket. Infrequently purchased items deserve extra scrutiny. Appliances, blinds, and fixtures are where fake discounts hide best because most people don't know the normal price. If you don't buy it often, slow down. One of the simplest checks is time. If you can wait a week or two without consequences, do it. Real discounts either disappear or change. Fake ones don't. If the price is the same later, you didn't miss anything. And finally, trust discomfort. If a deal feels rushed, overly dramatic, or oddly familiar, that feeling is data. You don't need to prove manipulation to protect yourself. You just need to step out of the urgency loop. Once you start shopping with that in mind, the pressure fades, the noise drops out, and you stop buying because the tag told you to, and start buying because the price actually makes sense. If this helped you shop smarter, like the video and subscribe. This channel breaks down pricing tricks, fake sales, and real buying decisions so you don't overpay, and so fewer people fall for this stuff in the first place.